Okay, let's unpack this. Picture a medieval European nobleman.
Mm-hmm.
Dawn breaks, and he's in church, immersed in stories of saints seeking absolution.
Right. Very pious.
Hours later, though, the scene shifts dramatically. He's at a boisterous feast, the air thick with ribald humor, tales of brutal battles.
Right the switch.
And if his honor gets questioned, instantly swords are drawn. A duel to the death seems better than shame.
Piety and violence just existing side by side.
Yeah, and it even sparks new cultural things like the Crusades or those military orders. It really makes you wonder, is culture ever truly static?
Well, what's fascinating here is precisely that dynamism, that image you painted. It beautifully shows how these internal contradictions within a culture aren't necessarily flaws, right?
Huh.
They can be the very engine driving its evolution.
Ooh.
Consider how the tension between those seemingly opposing values actually forged a unique cultural response back then.
Absolutely. And this isn't just some relic of the past either. Think about the United States today. You have this strong push for greater social equality. The idea of higher taxes for welfare and safety nets.
Sure.
Colliding with this really deep-seated belief in individual liberty, economic freedom.
Right. The tension is obvious.
People want a more equitable society, but at the same time, they champion minimal government intervention.
So that contradiction, that tension, it doesn't break the culture.
No, instead, it fuels our political debates, it shapes economic policies. It's almost like culture is this ever-flowing river,
Yeah, I like that analogy.
constantly branching into new streams, adapting, with these internal tensions acting as the very current pushing it forward.
That river analogy really resonates. And if we connect that idea to the bigger historical picture, what becomes clear is that while individual cultures have this internal energy,
Mm-hmm.
humanity as a whole has been on this remarkable, really long-term journey towards, well, becoming more interconnected.
Okay, and here's where it gets really interesting, I think. Just consider how isolated different parts of the world used to be.
Totally cut off.
The people of Tasmania, for example.
Hmm.
They lived for tens of thousands of years, completely unaware that other civilizations even existed.
Incredible isolation.
Or think about big events happening at the same time across the globe, say,
Yeah.
the Roman Empire dealing with the Goths in 378 AD.
Mhm.
The very same year, a Mayan king over in Tikal suffers a major defeat. These were totally separate, unconnected things happening.
Right, no link whatsoever. But then, around 1450 AD, we see this pivotal shift.
Okay, what happens?
Afro-Asia really emerges as the central hub, creating pathways, connections between Europe, Asia, Africa, through trade, politics, cultural exchange.
So things start linking up.
Exactly. And from that point on, those previously isolated regions start getting pulled into this growing global network one by one.
So you're talking about things like the fall of the Aztec Empire to the Spanish in 1521?
Yep.
The Inca Empire in 1532?
Yep.
Magellan's voyages connecting Oceania?
Mm-hmm.
The colonization of Australia starting in 1788 and then Tasmania getting absorbed shortly after? Suddenly, nowhere's truly isolated anymore.
Pretty much. While we still talk about authentic cultures, if we mean cultures that developed in total isolation untouched, well, those have basically vanished.
Right.
Global systems of law, economics, science, they become more and more dominant, more interconnected.
And the examples of this interconnectedness are just mind-blowing sometimes. Like Italian spaghetti, the tomatoes, the core ingredient, they came from Mexico.
Crazy, isn't it?
Potatoes, a staple in Polish and Irish food. They only got to Europe from the Americas a few centuries back.
Yeah, relatively recently.
Swiss chocolate. The cocoa bean is also from Mexico. Even the chili peppers that are so key to Indian cooking.
From the Americas, too.
Exactly. And think about that classic image of Apache or Sioux warriors on horseback.
Iconic.
They didn't even have horses until after 1492 because horses weren't native to the Americas. What are some other surprising examples you found?
Well, those food examples really hit home, don't they? They perfectly illustrate this long arc of globalization. It's not just a modern thing. It's this historical process over centuries.
Right.
A constant move towards greater, more complex unification. And as the text points out, the groundwork was laid even earlier, back in the first millennium BCE,
How so?
with those three potential universal orders emerging. The economic one, with merchants seeing the whole world as one market.
Okay.
The political one, with conquerors building empires.
Mm-hmm.
And the religious one, with prophets proclaiming a single truth for everyone.
So from the medieval nobleman's conflicting day to our globalized dinner plates, This unification thing has been brewing for a long, long time.
Absolutely.
Okay, let's dig into these unifying forces then, starting with something we handle every day: money. The book calls it a universal language of trust.
Yeah, and what's fascinating is money's incredible ability to just cut across so many barriers. That story about the Spanish conquistadors obsessed with gold in Mexico in 1519, it really sets the scene. The Aztecs valued gold, sure, but it wasn't their main universal currency. They used cacao beans, cloth.
Different values.
Totally. But for the Spanish, gold was everything. One of them called it a disease of the heart, only curable by getting more gold. It really shows how value is, culturally assigned.
That's a stark contrast, definitely. And the book notes that historically, money wasn't just about economics. It was a powerful symbol of power, even religious authority.
Absolutely. Think about coins minted to celebrate victories or coins with religious symbols stamped on them.
Right.
And the irony of enemies using each other's currency. You had Christian and Muslim states often fighting,
Yeah.
yet their merchants happily took each other's gold coins for trade. Muslim rulers, even while preaching holy war, would accept taxes paid in coins showing Christian symbols.
Wow. So on the battlefield, religion divides, but in the marketplace.
Money often unites. Beyond just practical trade, using the same currency, even between enemies, created this shared economic reality, a connection that sort of bypassed politics and religion.
It really shows how practical needs can sometimes trump ideology. Now, before this universal money system, we had barter, right? The book mentions the debt of obligation in hunter-gatherer groups. How did money become, well, necessary?
Well, as societies got bigger and people started specializing in jobs, barter just became incredibly awkward.
Right, I can imagine.
Imagine you're a shoemaker, you need apples, but the apple farmer needs legal advice, not shoes. Finding that double coincidence of wants, as they call it, gets tough.
Yeah, finding the perfect swap.
And the sheer number of possible exchange rates just explodes as you get more goods. With, say, 100 different goods, you've got nearly 5,000 potential trade ratios.
Okay.
With 1,000 goods, it jumps to almost 500,000.
That's insane.
Yeah, think about trying to track all that, trying to find someone who has what you need and wants exactly what you have. It becomes almost impossible.
No wonder we needed something simpler. So the move toward different kinds of money shells, salt, even cigarettes in prisons, it was all about finding something everyone agreed had value.
Exactly. Something universally accepted as a stand-in for value. And if you jump to today, physical cash is only a tiny part of the money out there.
Right. It's mostly digital now.
Over 90% exists just as electronic data, trillions and trillions of dollars. And the value of this digital money, just like all money before it, ultimately comes down to collective belief.
A dollar bill is just paper without that shared faith.
Precisely.
And that trust, the book argues, is built on the underlying political, economic, social systems. If those systems are stable and seen legitimate, trust in the currency holds.
But if there's a big crisis of confidence in those systems,
Right.
that's when currencies can suddenly nosedive.
Mm.
It's all deeply tied into psychology, public perception,
Yeah.
and tracing the history is fascinating. From Sumerians using barley as payment
Okay.
to King Alyattes in Lydia minting the first standardized coins around 640 BCE, guaranteeing weight and purity.
A big innovation.
Huge. Then paper money and now the digital age. Each step was about making it more efficient, portable, and ultimately boosting that crucial trust.
So money is basically a tool powered by agreement.
That's it. It lets a freelancer in Indonesia today connect economically with, say, an 8th century merchant in Baghdad, using the same gold dinar back then, separated by time and space, but linked by this idea of universal value.
That complexity of barter really underlines how important this seemingly simple invention was for letting societies grow.
Absolutely. It makes you appreciate the efficiency we take for granted with a shared currency.
So despite all our differences, cultural, religious, ideological money works on this basic principle of trust, a truly universal language. Okay, next up, let's look at empire. Another big unifier the book points to, though often through, well, political force.
Correct. And an empire, as the source defines it, isn't just a big country. It's defined by controlling many distinct peoples, maybe 10, 20, 30 or more,
Okay.
and having fluid, often expanding borders. Think of the British Empire historically.
But that unification under an empire, it often comes at a steep price, right?
Mm.
The book talks about smaller cultures getting eroded, even disappearing.
Definitely. Imposing unified laws, currency, sometimes language, it inevitably squeezes out local cultures.
Yeah.
But it's important to challenge the simple idea that empires only happen through conquest. History also shows voluntary alliances that sort of morphed into empires, like the Delian League becoming the Athenian Empire.
Ah,
And some long-lasting empires relied more on clever diplomacy and administration, like the Byzantine Empire.
so it's a double-edged sword then. Empires can bring stability, boost trade, spread technology,
Sure.
but they also risk crushing local identities. Whether it's seen as unifying or oppressive really depends on whose perspective you take, doesn't it?
Absolutely. And contrary to how we often think of empires as shaky and always collapsing from revolts,
Yeah.
they often show surprising staying power. Usually they fall due to outside pressures or maybe infighting among the elite, not mass uprisings. And even when one falls, the power often just shifts to new rulers, keeping that large-scale organization going.
Of course, we can't ignore the brutal side of empires. The book is clear about the wars, slavery, forced deportations, even genocide from the Mongols to European colonialism.
That's a crucial, undeniable part of the story. Yet, alongside that brutality, empires have also been these major centers for cultural mixing and innovation.
How so?
Philosophy, science, architecture, art, they often bloomed within empires because you had diverse traditions and resources coming together. Think of Cicero, Seneca, Augustine in Rome,
Yeah.
the Taj Mahal under the Mughals, the spread of Arabic learning through Islamic empires.
So empires are these incredibly complex things, exploitation and unification all mixed together, shaping the world for ages. The book mentions why empires spread their culture standardization, making things easier to manage and legitimizing their rule over all these different groups.
Exactly. But it wasn't usually just a one-way street. Empires often picked up and integrated things from the cultures they conquered.
Like what?
Roman mythology borrowed heavily from the Greeks. The Mongol Empire was known for its religious tolerance. The Ottomans adopted technologies and art styles from all over their territory.
But just adopting the imperial culture didn't mean you were suddenly treated as an equal, did it?
No, definitely not always. The example of Gandhi is powerful here.
Yeah.
Educated in the British system, fluent in English,
Yeah.
but still faced systemic discrimination within the British Empire. It shows that adopting the culture didn't erase the underlying power imbalances.
Right.
So empires often end up creating these hybrid cultures, but these mixed identities could be seen suspiciously by both the rulers and the ruled. Rulers might see it as diluted, while the ruled might see it as a sign of oppression or losing their heritage.
A very complex dynamic.
Very.
All right, moving from the often harsh unification of empire, let's look at the final pillar, religion. Now, today, we often think of religion mainly as a source of conflict.
True. That's a common view now.
But the book argues its historical role as a unifier was actually massive, maybe second only to money and empires in its reach.
Yeah, what's crucial is understanding religion's historical job in building social and political order. Human rules, human laws, they're kind of flimsy on their own, aren't they? Religion often provided that higher authority, that legitimacy. Think divine right of kings, or the religious basis for India's caste system, or just the moral rules underlying many legal systems. It gives reasons for rules that go beyond just human agreement.
And the book gives two main criteria for something to count as a religion. It has to be universal. Its truths apply to everyone.
Right.
And it has to claim a higher, non-human origin. Then it adds two more things that help them spread widely, supporting some kind of universal order and having that missionary zeal.
Exactly. Buddhism and Islam are prime examples of that missionary aspect. And you see this big shift in history from ancient religions that were very local, very exclusive.
Tied to one place or people.
Yeah, their gods belong to specific communities, specific lands. Then you get the rise of these universal religions. Figures like the Buddha or the Prophet Muhammad taught truths meant for all humans, breaking down ethnic and geographic barriers.
They actively tried to spread their message.
Right, fostering these much broader identities beyond just your local tribe or city.
Going even further back, the book contrasts this with the animistic view of hunter-gatherers, everything in nature having a spirit, all interconnected.
A very different worldview.
How did the agricultural revolution change that perspective?
Well, farming marked a huge shift in how humans saw the natural world. Animals, land, they went from being sort of fellow beings in a spiritual ecosystem to becoming resources, assets to be controlled, used for human benefit. This new power, this attempt to control nature, even though it was still unpredictable with droughts and floods,
Right.
created a need for intermediaries, someone to negotiate with the powerful forces of nature. And that's often where polytheism came in.
A pantheon of gods for different things.
Exactly. Gods of fertility, rain, war. It became like a social contract. Humans offer worship, sacrifices, and in return, the gods hopefully provide good harvest, protection, well-being.
So we went from being part of the ecosystem to trying to manage it through deals with gods.
Pretty much. And the book makes a good point challenging the modern dismissal of polytheism. It wasn't always about denying one supreme force.
Oh,
Many polytheists might have believed in an ultimate power, but they related to it differently, more flexibly perhaps, than the absolute focus of monotheism. The gods were often more like intermediaries.
how did the gods differ?
In many monotheistic views, God is the sole creator, deeply involved, the final judge. In polytheism, the top power could be more distant, neutral maybe, the universe running on its own laws, with the various gods managing specific aspects.
And this led to more tolerance.
Often, yes. That flexibility meant accepting other people's gods was easier. The Roman Empire, for instance, usually let conquered people keep their deities, just had to give a nod to the Roman gods for political loyalty.
No concept of heresy.
Largely, no. Without one single rigid dogma, there wasn't the same idea of wrong belief that you get in monotheism.
But then monotheism did rise. And the book says they often framed polytheism as primitive idol worship.
Yes, something to be actively stamped out. And this shift took time. You had early experiments like Akhenaten's Aten cult in Egypt, which didn't last.
Right.
Judaism evolved towards worshiping one god, Yahweh, exclusively, though maybe still acknowledging others existed. And initially, it was mostly for the Israelites.
So when did universal monotheism really take off?
The big turning points were Christianity, especially with Paul's mission to the Gentiles, and then Islam, spreading rapidly out of Arabia in the 7th century.
And the book suggests a key reason for monotheism's success was its different approach, polytheism being more accepting, while monotheism was often exclusive and missionary.
Precisely. If you believe you have the one absolute truth, then other beliefs are necessarily wrong. This naturally leads to trying to convert others, and sadly, often to conflict when different monotheistic faiths clash.
Now, the book also mentions dualistic systems as another way of seeing the world.
Right. The idea of the universe as this battleground between good and evil, it offers a kind of explanation for why bad things happen.
Zoroastrianism is the key example.
Yes. The cosmic fight between Ahura Mazda, the good force, and Angra Mainyu, the evil one. Human life is part of this struggle, with the promise that good will eventually win.
And this influenced later religions.
Hugely. Ideas like heaven and hell, God versus the devil, you can trace roots back to these dualistic concepts. It gives a simple answer to the problem of evil, though it does raise questions like who set up this cosmic battle in the first place.
It's amazing how those dualistic ideas stick around in culture, isn't it? The devil, Star Wars light versus dark side superhero stories.
That basic good versus evil narrative seems deeply appealing.
Then there's Buddhism, offering a totally different path.
Yeah, emerging around the 5th century BCE with Siddhartha Gautama, it's not focused on a god, but on liberation from suffering.
Through understanding karma and the Four Noble Truths.
Exactly. Recognizing suffering exists, understanding it comes from desire and attachment, knowing it can cease, and following the path, the eightfold path, to make it cease.
And the goal isn't heaven or hell, but nirvana.
Right. Freedom from suffering and the cycle of rebirth, a very different aim. And the unifying aspect isn't a shared God, but this shared understanding of suffering and a shared path to overcome it. It provides a framework for ethics, for community.
Though the book notes most Buddhists don't actually reach nirvana, but follow the teachings as moral guides.
Yes, often with rituals and reverence for the Buddha or bodhisattvas. It's a different way to understand the world, karma driving things, not necessarily God's will or cosmic battle. And it puts a lot of emphasis on self-effort for awakening.
Finally, the book gets into secular religions, modern ideologies that act like faiths.
It's an intriguing idea. Communism, for example. It has its sacred texts like Marx's Das Kapital, its prophets like Lenin, its holidays like May Day.
Rituals like parades and statues.
Exactly. And a core belief in historical laws leading to a future utopia. Even the Soviet drive to spread communism looks like proselytizing.
That's a really strong parallel. And then humanism, replacing God with humanity.
Right, with different flavors. Liberal humanism focused on the individual, socialist humanism on the collective,
And evolutionary humanism.
which focused on perfecting humanity, but in its extreme form, tragically gave rise to Nazi ideology.
Horrifying. Nazism as an extreme take on evolutionary humanism, creating that awful racial hierarchy.
Yes, viewing the Aryan race as superior and others as subhuman, leading to unimaginable atrocities.
It's a stark reminder that even without traditional religion, Humans cling to powerful belief systems, ideologies that shape the world, sometimes with religious-like fervor. Maybe worshiping humanity itself is the new dominant faith.
It's certainly a possibility raised by the source. So we've looked at money, empire, religion as these huge unifiers. Why these three? Why have they been so good at bringing vast, diverse groups together?
The book warns us against seeing history as inevitable, right? That hindsight bias trap.
Exactly. We look back and think things had to turn out this way. But take Constantine converting to Christianity, a massive event for Western history.
Yeah.
It could easily have gone differently. It was a complex political choice at the time. The book even asks, could the U.S. become Hindu someday? Seems unlikely now.
Yeah, but maybe Christianity dominating Rome seemed unlikely in its early days, too.
Precisely. History is chaotic, especially what's called second-order chaos.
Meaning,
It reacts to predictions about it. Think economics, politics, our beliefs about the future, like AI taking jobs, or a nation declining can actually change the present.
interesting.
And the book questions that easy assumption of constant human progress. Are we really better off now? Technology races ahead, but does happiness keep pace? It's hard to define better.
And that idea of culture as a mental infection, spreading, even if it doesn't help individuals.
That's a provocative thought, like sacrificing yourself for your nation or religion, does it benefit the individual? Maybe not directly, but the idea survives and spreads.
Sounds like memetics.
It touches on it, yeah. How cultural ideas, memes, evolve like genes, though memetics struggles to capture all the complexity of culture, values, perspectives.
And postmodernism throws another wrench in, suggesting no absolute truth in history or culture.
Right, that values are relative, dependent on your cultural viewpoint.
So history has no clear direction, culture spreads for its own reasons, but still, money, empire, religion manage to unite huge numbers.
And the key, the book argues, is their power to create compelling illusions, shared fictions that we all buy into, making them real in our social world.
How so?
Money is just paper or data, but we agree it has value. Empires build unifying stories, shared identities, even if imposed. Religions offer meaning, community based on shared faith. Think of a Muslim in Indonesia feeling connected to one in Turkey.
Despite huge differences because of that shared belief.
Exactly. These things aren't biological, but they become incredibly powerful through collective belief.
But that reliance on belief also makes them fragile.
Totally. If belief crumbles, the whole system can collapse. Empires fall, currencies become worthless, religions lose influence when their stories are questioned.
Their power rests entirely on us continuing to believe.
Precisely. On the ongoing acceptance of their narratives, their values, their legitimacy.
So to wrap up this deep dive then, we've looked at how culture is dynamic, full of contradictions that drive it forward. We've seen humanity's long, messy journey towards being more connected globally.
Yeah, very long journey.
And we've explored how money, empires, and religion have been these incredibly potent forces in that unification process.
All built on that amazing, sometimes shaky foundation of shared human belief.
Hopefully digging into your sources today has given you, the listener, some surprising insights, maybe challenged a few assumptions about how our world got shaped.
And it leaves us with a final thought for you to chew on, considering this immense power of shared belief we've talked about. What new unifying forces might be emerging in our super-connected future? And what core beliefs, what shared stories will they be built on?
That's a fascinating question to ponder, thinking about these historical patterns as we navigate, well, whatever comes next.